Montana Territory, August 1878. The sky was big and blue above the high plains, but Hattie Alden only saw the road ahead, dust rising behind her as she gripped the reins with shaking hands and didn't look back. Her husband's voice still rang in her ears, rough and mean like gravel under boot. She had waited until he was away at the trading post, packed what she could carry on the old mule, and slipped out before the sun cracked the horizon. The bruises on her ribs throbbed with every bump in the trail, but the pain reminded her she was free now. She had done it. She had left. After 4 years of cruelty, she was gone. By midday, the heat was heavy and her canteen near empty. The mule slowed at a bend where pine trees gave a few moments of shade, and that was when she saw him tall on a chestnut horse, leading a pack mule. A rifle was slung across his back, hat low, and his eyes narrowed as he spotted her. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was deep, calm, but alert. Hattie straightened. "Just passing through." He looked at her mule, then at the torn fabric on her sleeve and the split skin below her eye. He dismounted without hurry. "You heading toward Fort Benton?" "I do not need help," she said quickly. He nodded once. "Name's Yates Archer. I got a cabin 2 miles west. Creek runs by it. Safer than the trail tonight." I said I'm fine. He tilted his head. "You are bleeding." She pressed her hand to her side before she could stop herself. "It is nothing." Yates did not push. He just looked at her with steady eyes, then turned to adjust the gear on his mule. "You can ride on, or you can rest. Your choice. But I will be heading back now. Creek water's cold. Firewood stacked. If you change your mind." He mounted and tipped his hat, then turned toward the ridge. Hattie stared after him for a long moment, then looked at her mule, who was panting under the sun. One night. Just one night. Then she would move on. The cabin was small but clean, tucked beneath a bluff with cottonwoods swaying nearby. Yates did not ask questions as he handed her a tin cup of water and showed her where she could lay her things. He fed the animals, started a fire in the stove, and worked in silence while she sat stiffly on the edge of the cot. That night, she barely slept. She kept one hand near the knife she had taken from her husband's drawer. But the cowboy never crossed the line. He slept on a bedroll on the floor, his back to her, breathing slow and even. In the morning, he made coffee and offered her some without a word. She took it. By the third day, her ribs hurt less, and she had taken to helping with small things, washing the tin plates, sweeping the floor, feeding the chickens. Yates never asked about her bruises. He never asked why she flinched when footsteps came too quick, or why her wedding ring now lay buried by the creek. But he noticed. He handed her gloves when she helped him carry logs. He stepped back when she looked cornered. And he always looked her in the eye when he spoke. "You got people?" he asked once, sitting on the porch while the sun dipped low. "No," she said. He nodded. "I got a sister in Kansas. She writes sometimes. Not much." She glanced at him. "You live out here alone?" Too stubborn to do anything else. A silence settled, but it was not heavy. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked quietly. He stared at the hills. "Because somebody ought to be." By the end of the week, she had begun to smile again. Just small ones. When the chickens pecked his boots. When he cursed the stubborn goat. When he said something dry and unexpected that made her laugh out loud before she could stop herself. She had not laughed in years. That night, she sat on the porch steps while Yates sanded the edge of a wooden stirrup. "You planning to keep heading west?" he asked. She hesitated. "I had not thought that far. You do not have to decide tonight." She looked at him, his hands steady, his face quiet and sure. "Do you ever wish you had someone to share this with?" she asked. He looked up. "Yes." Her heart beat faster. "I do not know how to be anything but afraid." "You do not have to know yet." She blinked hard, then nodded. "All right." 2 weeks passed. She stayed, helped in the garden, took to milking the goat. Her bruises faded. The haunted look in her eyes eased. Then, one evening, while she was picking wildflowers near the stream, she heard hooves. Her blood froze. She turned. 3 riders. One of them was her husband. She bolted, heart pounding, running blind through the trees. She reached the cabin out of breath, crashing through the door. "Yates," she gasped. "He is here, he found me." Yates was already moving. He grabbed his rifle, stepped onto the porch. The men rode up slow. Well, her husband called. "Look at this little nest you built." Yates stood still. "You have no claim here. She is my wife. She left. She is mine. Yates raised the rifle. Not anymore. Her husband laughed. You going to shoot me, cowboy? If you touch her again, yes. The standoff stretched long and tense. Then her husband spat in the dirt. She ain't worth the trouble. He turned his horse. The others followed. But before he left, he looked back at her. You will never be anything without me. Hattie stepped beside Yates. Her voice was steady. You are wrong. She watched them ride off into the dusk. Yates lowered the rifle. You all right? He asked. She exhaled. I think I will be. That night, after the fire burned low, she stepped outside to where Yates stood watching the stars. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. You do not owe me anything. I know. She stepped closer. But I want to give something. His eyes searched hers. What? She reached up, her hand brushing his cheek. Trust. He caught her hand gently, held it there. I will take care of it, he said. And then, finally, she leaned in and kissed him, soft and sure. When they pulled apart, he whispered, I have waited for you. And she whispered, I am here now. The first frost came early that year. Thin ice skimmed the edges of the creek one morning, and Hattie stood over it, her breath silver in the air, watching it crack beneath her bootfeel. Behind her, the cabin's chimney smoked steady, the scent of burning pine curling toward the trees. She held a bucket in one hand, half filled with water, but she wasn't in a hurry to go back inside. The wildflowers had all folded into the earth, and the days had taken on that sharpness that made every sound carry farther. A raven called from a high branch. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a deer broke through brush. She turned when she heard Yates's boots on the frozen ground. He wore a wool coat now, patched at the elbows, and carried a bundle of chopped kindling in his arms. You'll catch cold standing there, he said, tilting his head toward the bucket. I used to wish for winter, she said. I thought maybe if the world froze over, he'd stop putting hands on me. Yates didn't move closer. I used to think quiet was the same as peace. But silence can be heavy when it's hiding something. She looked at him. It's not heavy here. No, he said. It's not. She lifted the bucket and followed him back to the cabin. Inside, the warmth wrapped around her like a thick quilt. She set the water down and took up the kettle while he stacked the wood. Later, as the wind rose outside and dusk slipped in early, Yates sat at the table sharpening a drawknife. Hattie stitched a torn sleeve near the hearth, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The only sound was the blade over stone and the soft pull of thread. I'll need to head into town come Monday, he said eventually. Supplies are low. You want anything brought back? She tied off her thread. I'd like a spool of blue, if they have it. A deep one, like lake water. He looked up. You planning something? Curtains. She folded the fabric once, then again. I thought they'd look nice over the front window. He gave a slow nod. They will. The silence that followed was close, not strained. Then she reached beneath the bench and brought out a tin box. She set it on the table between them and opened the lid. Inside, folded careful and thin, were paper's old letters, some yellowed, some torn at the corners. She pushed them forward. I never learned to read them. Her voice was steady. He said it wasn't worth the time. Yates glanced down, brow furrowing. They from your family? My father, mostly. Before he passed. I kept them hidden. He took the top one and unfolded it gently. His eyes moved over the words, lips barely parting. He wrote you from Virginia. Said the rains came late that year. Said he missed the way you hummed while you shelled beans. Her throat tightened. Will you read the rest to me? He did. Slowly. Voice low, so the fire didn't have to compete with it. She sat still, hands clasped in her lap, as the words unspooled memories she hadn't known she had, places she hadn't seen in more than a decade. When he finished, he looked up. He loved you. I think I forgot what that sounded like. You didn't forget, Yates said. You were just waiting to hear it true. That night, she stayed by the fire long after he'd gone to bed. She read the letter again through the soft hush of his voice in her mind, the words reshaping the way she saw herself no longer as someone wrecked, but as someone once cherished. In the morning, she found him by the corral, mending a broken gate post. She leaned against the rail and watched him work, the way he checked the grain of the wood before driving the nail. I want to build something here, she said. He didn't pause. What kind of something? A life that doesn't need hiding. He straightened, wiped his hands on his trousers, and turned to face her. Then let's build it, he said. Together. She held his gaze. You mean that? I've meant it since the first morning you stayed. She stepped forward, slow but certain, and laid her hand over his. I don't know how to be loved like this, she said. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to let it happen. She nodded once, and the quiet between them deepened, not empty, but full of all the things neither of them had ever been given before. Trust. Choice. A beginning that felt like home. And behind them, the cabin stood with smoke rising steady, a place no longer just for surviving, but for living. The first snow came in thin, drifting bands, not enough to stick, but enough to turn the wind sharp. Hattie stood just inside the doorway of the cabin, her hand resting on the frame, watching the flakes trace pale arcs through the air. Behind her, the hearth gave off a low, steady heat. Yates had gone to the barn before dawn, saying one of the mares was close to foaling. He hadn't come back yet. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped out into the cold. The barn door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the scent of hay and damp wood hung close. Yates was kneeling in the straw beside the mare, a pale-coated roan, his sleeves rolled up, his hands and voice calm. She's nearly through it, he said without looking back. Been a long night. Hattie moved closer, boots soft over the straw. The foal was already on the ground, legs folded beneath it, its coat slick and trembling. The mare lowered her head to nuzzle it, and a small, uneven sound left Hattie's throat. She's beautiful, she said. She's strong, Yates replied. That's what matters this far north. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. You didn't have to come out. I woke up and couldn't find you, she said. Didn't like that. He folded the cloth and set it aside. I'm glad you came. They stood in silence a while, watching the foal try to raise her head. Did you ever think about children? She asked. Yates's face shifted, not startled, but careful. Once. She nodded. He told me I wasn't fit to raise any. He didn't look away from the foal when he said a lot of things that weren't true. She pulled her shawl tighter. I keep wondering what kind of mother I'd be, if I even could be one. You don't have to answer that today, he said. But I've seen you with the garden, with the hens, with every broken thing that needed tending. You don't quit on anything you care about. She studied him. And what about you? His eyes met hers. You're not something I mean to quit. The foal gave a soft bleat, and the mare nuzzled her closer. They walked back to the cabin together, their shoulders nearly touching, boots pressing prints into the thin snow. Inside, Yates pulled the kettle off the hook while Hattie lit a lamp. She knelt to warm her hands beside the fire, then straightened and went to the cupboard. I found something under the floorboard, she said. An old box. Had a pair of gloves still good, and a letter. Yates raised his brows. What kind of letter? From the man who built this place. Said he bought the land after his wife passed. Wrote about the way her voice used to carry when she called in the cows. Said he built the back room by hand because she'd always wanted a sewing space. Yates leaned against the table. Funny how the things we leave behind speak louder than we ever do. Hattie nodded. I think he loved her honest. You think you'll use that room? He asked. I already moved the bench in. She looked at her hands. And I've been thinking. I wouldn't mind teaching myself to write. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. I'll help. She looked up at him, lips parted slightly. You're not afraid of how much I still have to unlearn? I'm only afraid of standing in your way. She reached up and touched the collar of his shirt, fingers brushing over the small tear she'd mended days ago. You've never done that. Not once. They didn't kiss, not then. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers, and they stood like that, the fire casting slow shadows over the walls, the wind pressing soft against the window pane. Later, after supper, she brought out a small slate and a stub of chalk he'd found in town. He sat beside her, his hand covering hers as he guided the letters across the surface. When she finally managed her name, jagged and slanted but hers alone, she let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. You're building something, Yates said, watching her. So are you, she replied. Outside, the snow thickened, but inside the cabin there was only warmth, the kind that came from hands held steady, from rooms slowly made their own, from the kind of love that asked nothing but presence and gave everything in return. By early December, the days curled in on themselves. Light came late and faded early, and the air took on a kind of stillness that pressed close to the skin. Hattie stood in the back room, a space she was slowly learning to call hers, measuring calico against the window frame. Her stitches had grown straighter, more sure, and though the curtains were plain, they hung neat and clean. Yates's boots sounded across the porch. There was a pause before the door opened. "Got something," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Down by the edge of the northern fence." She turned, setting the fabric aside. "What kind of something?" "Tracks human." He met her eyes. "Boot prints, not old. And they lead toward the bluff." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped past him, took her coat from the peg, and tied her scarf close under her chin. "You think it's him?" she asked, voice low. "No," he said, "but I'm not guessing." They followed the prints together, Yates leading, rifle across his back. The trail bent through the pines, crossed the frozen creek at a narrow point, and disappeared behind a stand of birch trees. When they reached the bluff, they found the remains of a camp. A ring of stones, some charred wood, and a heap of burlap sacks tucked beneath a cedar. Yates crouched, left in a hurry. No coals, no ash. "Could be a trapper," Hattie offered. "Could be someone watching." They stood a long moment, the only sound the wind rustling the pine needles above them. Yates's jaw tightened. "We'll move the livestock closer to the cabin," he said at last. "And I'll set a snare along the ridge trail." Hattie kept her gaze on the flattened grass near the fire ring. "He won't come again." "No," Yates said. "But someone else might." That night, Hattie didn't sew. She sat near the window, her knees drawn up beneath a quilt, watching the dark settle like ink across the snow. Yates worked quietly at the table, carving a block of cedar into a shape she couldn't yet name. After a while, she spoke. "Before I left, I used to imagine dying." Yates didn't look up. "I know, but I never imagined what it would feel like to live without fear." He set the carving down. "How does it feel?" "Strange," she said. "Like I've stepped into someone else's skin." "It's yours," he said. "No one else ever earned it." She turned toward him. "Do you remember that day by the creek, when you first offered me water? I remember you didn't trust me. I remember I wanted to," she said. "But I thought wanting was dangerous." He stood, walked over, and sat beside her on the bench. The fire popped behind them. "I haven't always been a man worth trusting," he said. She studied his face. "What changed?" "Time. Loss. And you." She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing the back of his knuckles. "I want to build more than curtains and fences, Yates. I want something steady." He turned his hand and folded hers inside it. "Then let's build it slow. But let's make it last." Later, as they banked the fire and latched the doors, he paused beside her in the dark. "Come spring," he said, "there's a parcel of land south of here. Good soil. Room enough for more than just stock and hens." She looked up at him. "You thinking of buying it?" "I was thinking of asking you if you'd want to build a house there. Together." Her breath caught. "Not just stay here." He shook his head. "This place saved us. But I want something that's ours from the foundation up. Every board set with choice." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the door to the back room, stepped inside, and returned with a square of muslin folded around something solid. "This is for you," she said. He opened it carefully. Inside was a book, worn, but intact, stitched with rough thread along the spine. "You made this." "I copied your sister's letters," she said. "The ones you said she wrote you. I wanted you to have them close." He looked down at the pages, then back to her. "You remembered every word." "I listened," she said, "because what mattered to you started to matter to me." Yates reached for her then, not rushed, not uncertain. His hands were warm and calloused, and when he kissed her, it was quiet and long, as if the months between them had all led to this single moment. Outside, the snow fell without sound. Inside, they made plans, not spoken in grand declarations or promises, but in the way their hands lingered, in the way their eyes held steady. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the ridge, they were still there together, not just surviving, but building something truer than either had thought possible. The last of the snow melted into the earth by late March, leaving behind a damp richness that clung to the soles of their boots and turned the pastures a deep, living green. Hattie stood at the edge of the field, sleeves rolled to the elbow, fingers black with soil. The rows she'd marked out stretched in even lines toward the tree line, and her knees ached from the crouch. But there was something steadying in it all, in the planting, and the waiting, and the knowing that something would grow. Yates leaned on the split-rail fence behind her, chewing a stalk of dry grass. You always plant in straight lines. I don't like crooked things, she said, brushing her hands off on her skirt. Not after living bent for so long. He nodded once and stepped down into the field, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. Got a letter from the land broker. Says the south parcel's ours now, clear title. Surveyor's been through and marked the corners. She straightened. You went into town without saying. You were sleeping, he said. Didn't want to wake you. She crossed her arms, not angry, but weighing something. You think I still need looking after? No, he said. I think I like knowing where you are when the road curves. She looked over the field again. I want a kitchen that faces the sunrise. Then that's where we'll put it. They walked the edge of the pasture together, stopping now and again when she stooped to tug a weed or smooth a furrow. He handed her his canteen without being asked, and she took it, drinking slow. You ever think about what your life might have been if you'd stayed back east? She asked. Sometimes, he said, but only in pieces. Never the whole shape of it. What do you see? He stepped over a fallen branch and offered her his hand. Smoke from a chimney. A chair that doesn't rock. A woman reading by the window. She glanced at him sidelong. What would she be reading? Something with horses, he said, and probably a better ending than she expected. They crested the ridge that overlooked the new land. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that held breath rather than absence. The creek ran slow along the far edge, its banks lined with willows just beginning to leaf out. She stepped ahead of him, her boots finding the flatter path first. I want a hearth built of river stone, she said, and a root cellar deep enough to winter through. He nodded, and a porch wide enough for 2 chairs. She turned toward him. You planning to sit still? For that porch, yes. They stood close, the breeze combing through her hair. His hand found her waist, gentle but sure. I've been thinking, she said, about the last few months, about how quiet it's been, and how I haven't missed the noise. He let his forehead rest against hers. You don't need to explain it. I want to, she whispered. Because I know now. I know I love you. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. You're the only thing I've ever built right. She kissed him, slow and rooted. When they parted, her hand stayed on his chest, over the steady beat beneath. I'll marry you, she said. His breath caught. You sure? She smiled, not wide, but whole. I've never been more. They married in early April, under the cottonwoods by the creek. The preacher came from 40 miles north, his wagon trailing dust. Hattie wore a dress she'd sewn herself, simple and pale, with blue stitching along the hem. Yates shaved, combed his hair back, and wore the same shirt he'd arrived in the territory with pressed now, the collar patched neat with a scrap of muslin she'd embroidered. There were no guests but the trees and the birds and the wind, but when he said her name, the sky felt closer. Afterward, they laid the first beam of the new house side by side. The tools were old, the wood rough, but their hands were steady. They worked through the days, pausing only for water, for kisses, for the long stretches of silence that needed no filling. By midsummer, the frame stood tall against the hills, and the porch had 2 chairs beneath its overhang. On a warm evening in July, she brought him a tin plate of beans and bread, and they sat watching the sun fade behind the barn roof. You ever think we'd get here? She asked. He looked at her, eyes soft. Not until you stepped off that trail looking like you'd outrun fire. She smiled and leaned into his shoulder. I did. He kissed the top of her head. You're safe now. She held his hand, their fingers laced and still dirty from the day's work. I'm home. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and wild mint. The creek ran steady below, and the lantern beside the door flickered gold against the wood. Together, they watched the stars rise, hand in hand, in the house they built with nothing but their own quiet strength. And there, with the fields growing full and the roof holding firm, they lived on not just side by side, but heart to heart, in a life they made wholly their own.